What's up lads, you're with Budget Monk and welcome to a video here which is going to be based around what I have learnt so far in Imperator Rome. I don't know if you guys have ever played a game and wished that you had known something very simple that you overlooked throughout the course of the game, and it makes you wish that you had known that and you want to start again. I hate that feeling, and yeah, maybe I've reached you too late, this video has reached you too late, but the aim of this video is to basically cover every specific little thing which I think is relevant here. And forgive me, I'm not going for entertainment or anything like that, I'm just going for information, so this might be quite mercenary. We're just going to quickly go through subject to subject, and I hope it benefits some people out there. So starting off, if you go to the nation overview here, you're going to see a color coding here with your ideas. So if you don't know what your ideas are, you can spend 50 oratory power to take a bonus. These consist of military, civic, oratory, and religious, and other ones become available once you advance in technology. Now, with that being said, there's going to be a color coding determined by your actual government type. So in this case, we're going to want to take 2 military and 1 oratory. And although you have different options available, it's almost a necessity to pick the appropriate ones here. 2 military and 1 oratory, and that's going to complete this here, and you're going to have access to this bonus, which includes +1 to each monarch point. It's kind of akin to EU4 having +50 power projection, except it's going to be available at all times, +1 monarch point and these bonuses. Now the strength of this bonus does increase as the strength of your nation and government type increases as well, so it's basically a necessity. The only sort of justifying not spending your oratory power here initially would be if you were playing a very small nation and you wanted to make a claim, for example, and jump into a war very quickly, because otherwise you felt like you were going to be boxed in. But this, in terms of points, is the best way to do it, because now we're going to be making oratory power over time. Okay, next up we're going to be talking about military traditions. Basically, these traditions that you have available are different based on which region of the world you're in. So there's a few different kinds of traditions, including barbarian traditions, Italic traditions, Greek traditions, and so on, Levant and Arabian traditions, and that's going to determine what you have available. So this is not always going to be the same, however it will be the same between myself with Italic and this guy with Italic, for example. Now basically this is reduced in cost dramatically by 25% for each military advance. So rather than actually spending 800 here when this becomes available with 800, if you actually tech up, it's going to be reduced down to 600 and then 400. It will not go below 400. Basically half the cost is the minimum cost. But if you're not going to war and you're not taking advantage of these, it's best to just basically not take them, and you can take them for cheaper later on. Okay, next up we're jumping into the economy tab. And these here, when you go into the economy tab, are kind of like sliders in EU4 where you can turn your army maintenance down, for example. So here you can see that your morale decreases by 80%, but your army maintenance decreases. This is kind of the equivalent of turning your slider down. Fun fact though, you can go the other direction and actually increase the pay to increase the morale. But in this game, as you can see, your morale, well, you can see it change here because I just turned it down, but it actually recovers quite slowly, so just be aware of that. It's made to not just be able to zip back and forth between these and exploit that. We're going to go over here and look at commerce. Basically, each province has the potential to have trade routes. You can see all over the place. I actually have a trade route here apparently because of the government policy. We'll get into policies at a later date. But basically, by default, provinces have no trade routes. Your capital has 1. If you go to commerce here and you hit free trade, you get +1 trade route to every single province. It does reduce your commerce income by 15%, but as a trade route is worth about 0.4 ducats, the fact that we're going to gain 3 trade routes and even more, exponentially more as we expand, is just ridiculous. And the trade routes themselves way outvalue the negative percentile of 15%. So 15% of nothing is nothing, right? Whereas the trade routes actually generate more money. Now with that being said, I believe eventually you will actually gain so many trade routes that the 15% is actually relevant. But if we just go ahead and click that button, free trade, we now just gain +1, 2 in our capital, and 1 in each other province continuously until the end of the game. Very highly recommend that you do that. Okay, next up guys, if we go to the trade overview, we're going to be able to click this button. So what this button does, basically, you have surpluses in your capital, right? you're going to notice if you're a nation like Rome, especially if you expand, or any nation that's powerful or has been expanding, people are going to offer you trade. And what they're asking is they're asking for surpluses. You can only offer to trade, export trade, and therefore they ask you for trade, your surpluses. Now the issue is that surpluses give you a bonus. So for example, pretend we didn't have iron. Iron will actually unlock heavy infantry, but for each surplus you gain 5% morale to the province, and the capital bonus gives you 10% heavy infantry discipline. So basically having a surplus, which is what we have here, represented by the image, means you have a resource. The +1 means you have 2. We're basically receiving plus 5% manpower and 10% heavy infantry discipline in Rome automatically. Problem is that people are going to ask us for our iron. By actually hitting this button, you're going to never get requests for trade unless you have so much excess, so we'd have an additional iron here, that it will not remove your surplus bonus. I highly recommend clicking that button. It starts here, allowing trade. You're going to click that block surplus, and that's going to mean that you're not going to have to micromanage each individual trade, because ideally, theoretically, you guys can play this game yourself, but you can see here that fish, for example, gives us growth, a surplus gives more growth, and then the surplus in the capital gives freeman happiness. So ideally, we're going to want 2 of each individual resource in our capital, of all resources in the capital in particular, because they will have a capital bonus. So again, that's going to prevent you from people just automatically asking for it, and you're not going to know if you're penalizing yourself or what to trade away. Now if somebody offers you something, you know it's a net benefit and that you're not gimping yourself in another manner. Okay, let's talk about scorned families next, guys. So basically, when you open up the game, almost always there's going to be a tab here saying that you have scorned families. In regards to the amount of families, typically it can vary. I think there's quite some randomization here at the beginning of the game. There are some characters which will always be in the game and some that won't. Typically, when you have a lot of scorned families, the families won't be so large, at least. There's that. So basically, they're looking for employment. The options of employment that you have is when you expand into multiple regions. You can see we have Magna Graecia here in Italia. Italia will be our ruler, but you have governors. So you can actually click on a region, a province belonging to a region, and employ a governor. You have governmental positions, and you have technology, research, and then also you have admirals and generals. Well, basically, you can split your armies up to create more jobs, but in regards to scorned families, I felt in the beginning of the game it was difficult to actually identify which person actually was unemployed, and there's a very simple solution to this. It's basically mousing over the loyalty here. So you can see here that we have 8 and 8, they're both as good as each other, but by mousing over the loyalty, you can see that this one belongs to a scorned family. So if we go to our army here, we can know that both of these are good with martial, but we're giving a scorned family a position here. And likewise, you can actually give a lesser general a position in the meantime and sort of just get rid of him later if you want. But you're giving him a job in the meantime, and then we'll go ahead and, again, scorned family. So we just employed 3 people there, and yeah, basically that's going to help resolve that. Now also, scorned families and loyalty and stuff is going to be much less consequential unless you have more to rebel. So basically your home region is really stable. You're going to start becoming concerned about families as you expand more and more, so just keep that in mind. If you're chilling and you don't have any jobs and you have a couple scorned families, don't worry about that, because it's not going to do anything until later on in the game anyway. Alright guys, next up let's talk about loyalty. So if you go ahead and click on your capital province, and you see this bar below the province, it's going to tell you your loyalty. Now the capital province is always loyal. When you go ahead and look at other provinces, however, you're going to see how much this changes. There's a lot of modifiers here, it's a little bit convoluted, but basically the main thing that is going to change this is actually going to be unrest. So if the province is a different culture or a different religion, it's going to have a dramatic impact, and you're going to want to make sure that the loyalty remains above 33%, or else you're going to have a civil war. So the best way to do this basically is to improve your unrest and improve your governors here. So the starting governor in this position, for example, he only has 5 civic, and civic is the governing stat. Now if we look at Magna Graecia, we can see that it is mostly composed of Roman culture and Hellenic religion, meaning that it's going to be fairly stable and we're not going to struggle with loyalty too much. We'd be more concerned about, if we look up here, this region, for example. This region's not very Roman or Hellenic, so it's going to be very unhappy with us when we annex it, and you'd want to make sure when you expand up into sort of these provinces, up into this region, that you apply a very strong, aka a very strong civic governor. But there's another thing that you can do, which is actually apply, I don't have anybody ready here, let's just quickly force march. You can use your troops here by clicking this button, assign to region. And by assigning to region, it will actually reduce the unrest. So you can't do it while you have a commander, and I can't change the commander because I just did that a moment ago in this video. But if you have a stack without a commander, in fact, look, we'll split some off and you can assign it to the region. So you can see the effect it has in all of Magna Graecia. I think the capacity is 20,000 per region, just from my own experience, but you can do that, and now see the general, if you will, is the governor, and we're reducing unrest. Another thing you can do is you can take your omen power and reduce unrest. Another thing you can do is actually go to edicts here, and these are the ways, excuse me, here, and I think it's local autonomy. Improving the happiness, excuse me, I don't know why I'm stuttering. So this is the sort of tactics here that you're going to utilize in new conquered regions to try to keep them stable. I hope that helps. Okay, next up guys, let's talk about republics. So it seems to be roughly the same based on regardless of your government type, like whether it's democratic or a plutocratic republic or something like that. It seems to mostly have an effect on these bonuses, but the government is roughly the same. Some differences here, like instead of discipline you might have mercenary maintenance, but basically these jobs, you can see what the job actually does, and it's based on the strength of the person running the job. Well, this job here is actually Senate influence, so it can seem almost entirely random who's going to be your next heir, if you will, the person to be elected to become the ruler. Now, part of the reasons it can become so confusing is because you have a representative of each faction, but if one faction is extremely dominant, then somebody else from the faction is going to actually become the representative. And the reason is because you can't serve terms sort of back to back to back to back. It has to be sort of maybe every 4th term you can get somebody in. So it can become confusing because there's kind of a second in power that's not represented here. But basically, to put things simply, you can see here that the military faction is winning, and it's represented by this number. It's equal between the civic and the military faction, but it's kind of the military faction's term to serve because the civic faction is currently winning. And part of the reason that this is pulling ahead is because of this here, the censor. So the censor's job inside the government increases Senate influence, which means this is ticking up. If we go here, you can see the modifier, 0.7, which is generated by this person having the job. So you do actually have some control, and you can actually look at the stats, who sucks and who you want to avoid. By the way, the populist faction is typically something you want to avoid because they're kind of the dud party. Maybe his stats are really good, but it increases all power cost when they're in control. So let's say the religious faction is really powerful, we like him, we want him to be employed. You can click on this and you can look at the people to represent you. So this person belongs to the religious faction. However, keep in mind that however much this is impacted is going to be based on their oratory power. So we can give the religious faction an edge, and this can be changed as many times as you want, by the way, but it's going to be less of an edge that we can give the military faction because we have better military orators. Does that make sense? So now the religious influence is increasing by 0.5, and given some time, you can actually help them become elected. Same thing as this, by the way. You can actually do a one-shot endorsement of a faction to improve their standing. It does cost you tyranny, which is something that goes down over time, typically a negative modifier, which you don't want to have too much of. And it costs you some oratory power, but you can instantly improve them as well to try have some control over your elections and try to keep some of the dud stats out of the government. Alright guys, next up we're going to be talking about the edicts here, or the government policies. I've already mentioned this briefly, But basically, if you go to the provincial map mode here, you can see the different provinces, and every single different province can actually have a buff that you can apply. Now, many of them are obviously advantageous, like civilization effort. If you go to the civilization map mode, you can see areas that you might be expanding into, which are uncivilized, and you can apply that edict there to civilize them, basically. And that edict, if I can remember correctly, it has a chance of promoting tribesmen to a better pop. So tribesmen are kind of a whack pop for us, and so a lot of tribesmen typically exist out in uncivilized areas. You can see they're around some 5s, some 7s. So if we own this province, you can civilize them, but you can also use the culture conversion one and the religious conversion one as well, government policy, so that over time you can see 27% chance that they will be one pop will be converted to Roman culture, or the religious one, 25% chance that a pop will be converted to Hellenic faith. So these are things that you can actually do in new regions that you conquer to try to convert them over time. It does cost some oratory, I believe it's 50 oratory to change, so just keep that in mind. And more importantly, when you apply a governor to the region, so a new region is going to be ungoverned, if you conquer it, you apply a governor, it's going to randomly place a policy on each province inside of the region. So just keep that in mind, that if you place a governor, randomly applies them. So you definitely want to put the governor on first and then put a policy, and know that that will last a while. And with that being said, you definitely want to value young governors for that purpose, because each time your governor dies, you reapply a new governor, and it's going to randomly scramble all of your edicts within inside the region. So I guess you guys understand me. If you conquer something inside of this region, or all of the region, let's say, and then you apply a governor, it's going to randomly apply a policy to every single one of these provinces. So that can be quite taxing on your oratory power to either, number one, have it scrambled and unoptimized, or number two, have to readjust them for every single province. So yeah, there's that. Alright guys, next up let's talk about technology and research. So basically, very often when you start a random small nation, it will tell you with one of these modifiers that your research efficiency is bad. It's talking about this variable. Basically, it's your amount of citizens which produce research. They are the pop which produces research in proportion to the rest of your population. If your citizens are low, your research efficiency is going to be low. Now, it only gives you a notification if you drop below 60%. However, personally, with my personal preference, I think the higher you can get your research efficiency, the better, all the way up to the capacity of 300%. That's my personal playstyle, and the best way to do that is to actually upgrade freemen straight into citizens. Now, when you look at your pops, all pops have modifiers. And if you look at your capital here in Rome, you can see that there are 3 modifiers of 25%. One is for being in the capital city, one is for being in the capital area, which is the province, and one is for being in the capital region. So the capital city has 25% modifier, the capital province has 25% modifier, and the capital region of Italia has 25% modifier. What that means in actuality is a citizen out here is 75% less effective than a citizen in Rome. In the province, 50% more effective, and in the region, 25% more effective. That means you're going to want to prioritize upgrading citizens that are inside Rome, or freemen to citizens inside Rome, and that's going to increase your research efficiency. Now, what that actually means, ironically, is that the larger you get, especially if you're expanding outside of your region, the harder it's actually going to be to keep your research efficiency up. So I'm not going to get too hard into my thoughts or criticisms of the game, but just really quickly, a tip for me personally would be try to stay small and play tall. Get your research up, get some good advantages, and then try to prioritize upgrading with your oratory over time and expanding into your province and regions, as opposed to outside of your regions like down here in Rome. Just do it later once you have some advantages over your enemies. Okay, so next up guys, let's talk about constructing buildings. If we look at the buildings, they each cost 100 base, but as a republic, if you have the civic faction in control, it actually reduces building costs, which is pretty good, by 10%. And if you are of a government type here, which can choose a civic idea, I recommend the building cost reduction here of 30%, but we can't choose a civic idea. Now, with that being said, I recommend amongst buildings to actually begin the game focusing on marketplaces big time. And the marketplaces, unlike the other buildings, actually improve civilization level. And I personally think they're the best, and you should build them, and you should preferably build them in areas that you have a lot of citizens and slaves. Predominantly your capital city, that's the obvious one. And by actually doing that, you'll raise the citizen level. Very important, especially if you're playing a nation that is trying to civilize uncivilized areas. So recommend the marketplace above other buildings, as it will get an economic snowball going, and you basically spend money to make money, and that will raise the civilization level. It's kind of the best building in my opinion. Okay guys, let's talk about two military techniques, beginning with one here. So by the way, we might lose this battle. I really couldn't care less. My morale's not even full. I'm not trying, but I just want to demonstrate to you guys some basic stuffs with combat. So as you can see here, this general is 8 martial, and this general is 7. Now this is going to be really relevant. Why? Because we're going to use this general to take over the combat here. So he's going to arrive in 10 days, and we're going to arrive 5 days after him. Let's see how this goes. Basically, we're going to be talking about these actions. They're called actions, apparently. Now, the action, when you click on it, is going to give you a few options available, and it starts on the default of shock. It's going to talk about tactic effectiveness, and this is really appealing. It's just going to be based on your composition. So if you had one unit type which benefits from this, like for example, heavies benefit from shock and bottleneck, well then if our entire composition was built up of heavies, we would have 100% effectiveness with shock or bottleneck. But however, therefore we're going to take bottleneck, right? Because it's got the best efficiency. But just keep in mind that that is hardly as relevant as these. And what are these? You can see that the bottleneck is 10 or 11% more effective against shock. And if we look at shock, it is actually 10% less effective against bottleneck. So it's all about countering your opponent, and these modifiers are way better than detective effectiveness. Just keep that in mind. You're looking to counter your opponent. So the best tip that I have is to have a second army incoming to replace the actions of your first army. So we're going to be taking the bottleneck because it's just the best. And maybe, I don't know, it's the beginning of the game, he could be on shock. It's always guesswork here. But what we're going to do as soon as the battle breaks out is actually look at what stance he's taking, and then have the reinforcing stack counter him. Now again, my morale's low, we might lose. But with that being said, let's try hard. The next tactic, I'm going to execute both of these. But the next tactic, and I hope you guys benefit from this, is the primary, secondary, and flanking cohorts. This is hard to understand, but I'm going to try to explain it to you, and it really doesn't help that the description is quite awful here. Like, it says this type of unit here in secondary cohort position will be in the second row and will engage the enemy after the primary cohorts have fled or been destroyed. So the implication of this is that there are multiple rows, and that this is going to wait until the primary cohorts are all completely destroyed before they engage. Now that is not entirely true. What's actually happening is that this is based in the center, the primary cohorts are in the center, and this is based in the flank on the outside, and we're talking about a line, okay? In the center of the line is your primary, next to that is the secondary, and on the flank is the third, or the flanking cohort. Do you understand? So center is on both sides, secondary, flanking, positioning. So all that means is basically if you outnumber your opponent, then your flanks are not going to be engaging their troops. That's all that means. In this case, you'll see that we are. Now, what's the relevance of this? You can change them around. So if we look at the units here that we have, there are all the units that are available like war elephants, but we don't have them. We're only concerned about the archers, the heavies, and the cavalry that we have. Well, look at archers. Archers trade against other archers for 0. They trade against chariots for 0. Heavy infantry and horse archers, 0. War elephants, 0. But the things that we're interested in is the light infantry. So they counter light infantry 25% stronger, and they are weak against cavalry. Heavy cavalry, light cavalry, camel cavalry, 10%. So let's assume that, just like us, his archers are the primary cohort here. As we can see, he has archers, light units, and heavy infantry. Okay? Well, we know that cavalry is more effective against archers. So if his archers are primary, we're going to put our cavalry primary. And that's going to have our cavalry busting right through the center while he tries to skirmish, because cavalry counter archers. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm going to switch those. Now let's look at, he has light infantry. We don't. Light infantry are weak to archers, as we already looked. So let's assume he doesn't have cavalry, okay? So let's assume maybe his lights are on the sort of center, primary and their secondary. So if that is the case, our archers will be countering those. And then we can't counter his heavies. We don't have anything that counters heavies, but we can try to have our heavies combat his heavies on the flank. So if we can counter him with the primaries and the secondaries, then the heavies will hopefully be effective enough. Now, I know that was all a long explanation, but as you are about to get a visual aid here, it should become more clear what's happening. And whether we win the battle or not, I don't care. Our morale's low. I just wanted to demonstrate this to you. So here we go. Alright, we're going to click on this button and boom. Now let's analyze this, okay guys? Look how quickly we are annihilating him. He's got reinforcements and it's not over yet. Why? It's just luck. It was luck of the die here that he began with a shock action and our bottleneck is countering him. So you can see here that he's 10% weaker versus bottleneck, but we are 11% stronger versus shock. So we're annihilating him. But if you analyze this, I hope you can see what I'm saying. This is our primary, this is our secondary, and this is our flanking. So he's composed completely of archers and heavies. Now, if you look at archers, guys, archers trade evenly with heavies, and heavies trade evenly with heavies. So our flanks and centers are trading perfectly evenly. The difference is that our cavalry is countering his archers and obliterating them. This is supposed to represent they're his primary units, they're in the front, they're supposed to be skirmishing, and we're just obliterating them, combined with the other bonuses. So despite him being almost entirely full morale, he's almost losing before the others arrive. Now, the point of this tactic here, sending the stronger marshal in afterwards, is to, this was random. He could have countered us, but we would change it now to bottleneck and counter him as we come in. Now keep in mind, he might be doing the same thing here, so we're going to keep it slow and see what happens as he arrives with more troops. Okay. Do you see? He brought in a stronger marshal, and he changed it to bottleneck himself. The second stack that came in is bottleneck. So we're going to come in and counter bottleneck with skirmishing. So even though the tactics are worse, this does +5 against bottleneck, and this bottleneck is 10% weaker against skirmishing. So we're going to come in, and if I don't get an event grief me here, so I can see what's happening, boom, we've now changed that back to skirmishing. Now, as far as our composition is concerned, I'm not that advanced, guys, to show you the reinforcing. So it's getting really convoluted here. You can see my cavalry are in the primary like I did, but it's getting really convoluted here as we both reinforce. And it looks as though we're going to lose the battle because he said they were even better than I did. It's just a coincidence. I don't think the AI employs that tactic, but he did have his best marshal in the back just like we did, so we will lose. But I hope that clearly demonstrates what I wanted to demonstrate. Number one, the tactic of rearranging your troops works the best in a just straight up one-for-one battle before this gets really messy with reinforcements. Number two is the sending better generals in to follow up and change the tactic. That's how you win. However, he just counted us, so we're going to lose. I hope that did its job showing you guys what I wanted to show you though. Okay, so that's pretty much it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope somebody was able to benefit something from that and understand everything that I was saying. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in another video. So I wanted to just tag on the end here, guys, that the best way to learn these games is actually watching content producers. And if you guys want, I would go ahead and chuck up a Let's Play of this game for old time's sakes, where I used to do Let's Plays on this channel. So let's see some support in the comments if you guys want to see that. Otherwise, I'm perfectly happy continuing what I'm doing over on my live stream and so on. Peace out, guys. I'll see you later.